All right, ladies and gentlemen, perfect timing, Joel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Election 2024. So today we are going to cover our second topic. Today's topic is all about immigration. So that is the theme of today's class. It's all about immigration. And the question is, tighter borders or more open borders? That is literally at the heart of today's conversation. But first, as we always do, I'd like to tell you a story/joke. And it goes like this. There was a fellow, a Jewish immigrant from the old country who wanted to become an American citizen. And challenge was he could not speak English. And you know, when you want to become an American citizen, there's an interview process, you gotta answer some questions, etc. By the way, my wife recently did this. She was born in Montreal, grew up in South Africa, and she recently, I think last year or so, became officially a U.S. citizen. Until then, I was married to an alien. I mean, a legal alien, but nonetheless, an alien. Okay, so this fellow, the Jewish immigrant, wants to become an American citizen, but he can't speak English. So his friend tells him, listen, not to worry. They ask the same 5 questions. Just memorize the answers and you will be golden. Question number 1 is, what is your name? And to that, you'll answer Moshe Weiss, because that's your name. The second question is, how many children do you have? Answer 5. That's how many children you have. The next question is, how many states are there in the United States of America? The answer is 50. The next question is, who was the first president of the United States? The answer is George Washington. And when they ask, are your parents alive? Say, say, thank God, both. That's it. Moshe Weiss, 5, 50, George Washington, thank God, both. So he practices. He doesn't know English, but he practices those 5 answers. He gets, by the interview, the fateful day arrives. He stands there, and the question is asked, who was the first president of the United States? He answers Moshe Weiss. They say, how many states are there? He says 5. How many children do you have? He says 50. He says, what's your name? George Washington. And the fellow says, who's crazy? Me or you? He says, thank God, both. So that is, all right. The truth is that immigration is no laughing matter. There's serious issues at stake.
That was a good one, Rabbi.
I will say, sorry?
That was a good one.
Thank you. They're not always good, but I appreciate it. So immigration is not a laughing matter, because the truth is, it's constantly, it's always an issue, and especially when election season comes around, it becomes an issue. And I want to just reset one thing. I just want to reset what I mentioned last week about this course. The goal of this course is not to get into the politics, is to talk about the issues. And that's a very important point, because politics, yeah, it's easy to get caught in the politics and the candidates and the people, and there's plenty of opportunities to have that conversation outside of a Torah class. We're going to look at the issue. We're looking throughout this course at the real issues that our country faces. And the goal is to look at them from a uniquely Jewish perspective, using Torah concepts, Torah ideals. And tonight, as we'll see, we're using some good old Jewish precedent and historical precedent when addressing these issues. So when it comes to immigration, again, the question comes up again and again and again. And the question really is, should we advocate for, should our society possess stronger borders, or should they be more open borders? That's at the core of the question, right? Should we tighten the borders? Should we open the borders? Should we say, no, you can't come in? Or should we say, we welcome those that wish to come in, right? That's kind of the question that's at stake. And, you know, this depends who you ask. You'll get a lot of different opinions. But again, in this course, we're looking at this from a uniquely Jewish perspective. What does Jewish law, what do Jewish values say about these very important questions? And as we'll see, Jewish wisdom has a lot to say about it. I want to begin actually with, I want to begin by passing around this handout that contains two texts that I think are absolutely compelling. If you don't mind, take and then just pass back. Take and please pass back as well. I'm going to put this up on the screen for everybody. Now, the text that I'm about to share with you are very intriguing and very important to the conversation. And it's really going to get us started. It's really going to get the conversation started. So here's what this is. In 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella evicted, expelled, kicked out the Jews from Spain. And at that point, Jews were told either, basically leave, or you have to convert. In other words, if you don't want to, yeah, there's another. We're doubling up tonight. So the question, the choice was given to the Jews in Spain: either convert, or you have to leave. And if you leave, you have to leave behind. You can't take any of your wealth with you, basically. So it's, those are the choices, and none were good. And so obviously, as you can imagine, Jews were looking for a place to go. And one of the more natural places for Jews to relocate was Portugal, which is right next to Spain, all part of the Iberian Peninsula. Here's what happens next. So take a look at the handout that we just passed around, and I have it here up on the screen as well for those online. Take a look. Jewish immigration to Portugal. Know that the portion of Jews who turned to Portugal numbered 300,000. That's a significant number of Jews from Spain that showed up on the border, trying to get into Portugal. The Jews of Portugal took counsel to bring order to this emigration, because all of these emigres were extremely poor. By the end of the lengthy proceedings, they had resolved to ask the Portuguese king to refuse their entry so as not to make themselves loathsome in the eyes of the king, for the kingdom was too small to readily contain so many poor people. When my great-grandfather, the notable Don Yosef ibn Yahya, heard about this, he vociferously and strenuously objected. How can we close the doors of salvation to these impoverished people, he asked. But the Jews refused to listen to his words. So it's interesting that we have here a historical precedent. I think it's fascinating. This happened in 1492, where the Jews from Spain are knocking on the door of Portugal, and it's the Jews, fellow Jews in Portugal, who go to the king and tell the king, please don't let the Jews in, because they're afraid. Well, let me ask you, why did they say that? What was the fear? Help me out here.
They would be persecuted once the poor Jews came in, that their reputation would go down, and they would then be persecuted like this.
That's right. So once there's too many Jews, too much of a burden, it's just going to sway the whole balance, and they're going to find disfavor. But it's interesting because the king ultimately, sorry, not the king, the rabbi, Don Yosef ibn Yahya, said, look, what's going on over here? How can we close the door of salvation? So we see almost these two sides. You have to let the refugees in, versus we have to protect ourselves. We have to close the borders, open borders or close borders. Here, again, we have a debate. Now, let's take a look at what happened at the same time. There were also Jews that wished to immigrate to Italy, and many did. And here's another account of what happened in Italy. Similar, but different, and we'll talk about the differences. From Spain, ships arrived in Italy with exiles. The non-Jewish residents of the cities did not grant them entry. So the Jews went to the Republic of, how do you pronounce that? Genoa, where there was a shortage of food, but where they were allowed entry. Some of the younger Jews who could not bear the suffering went to the churches to convert so as to receive some bread. Many non-Jews went about in the streets with wooden crosses in one hand and bread in the other, telling young Jews, if you bow to this, you can have bread. Because of the hunger, some of the Jewish refugees left Genoa for Rome. The Jews of Rome gathered to discuss how to prevent their entry, lest they encroach on their livelihoods. They immediately gathered 1,000 gold crowns to give to the Pope so that he would refuse their entry into his domain. The Pope, upon hearing these words, said, "This is news to me. I was under the impression that Jews are compassionate to each other, but here they act cruelly. Again, we see here the tension between the desire to open up the borders and allow the fellow Jews in. At the same time, there's a fear of, well, what was the fear in this case when it came to Italy? What was the state of fear?
Rome is a little unique though. Because Rome, they have to live in a specific ghetto and they weren't allowed to leave that. We were just very crowded.
Nice.
But it was very crowded in a very bad area, that small area. My guess is they were also afraid that there would be very little to go around.
Right. It seems like there was but yeah.
So Rabbi Sollish, I think I'm missing a piece.
Okay, give me one. So one second. I'm gonna repeat some of the ideas that are being mentioned.
Yeah.
One of the ideas that's being mentioned is that Rome was quite small, and the area in which the Jews could live in Rome was a small ghetto, and there were concerns about being able to viably fit into that area. Right. That's one. That's what Janice is, and then Joel is saying that there was a limited occupation. Money lending, let's right. So they were money lending at that time, and many were, because they couldn't have other vocations. And the concern was too many people doing the same thing could end up not good for everybody. Yeah.
Also, I think the community has to think, are they able to take these people in and integrate them and be able to support them and feed them?
Right. Will it be financially viable to take in and to feed and to support? Okay. What I think is interesting here. Oh, and it's interesting. The Pope says, this is news to me. I was under the impression the Jews were compassionate to each other, but here they act cruelly. Now, who knows? Who knows? Is that real? Is that him using what's the word that I'm looking for? Like a pretext to say something, to once again, bash the Jews. If they would have said yes, he would have said, how dare you? You didn't ask me. If they would have said no, you don't even like your own. So who knows? But the point is, it isn't interesting. We're not coming to any conclusions right here on these are just two stories. But what I think is fascinating is that we see that the questions that surround immigration, such difficult questions that we face in 2024, and border questions and refugee questions and jobs, and are they taking jobs? Are they adding jobs? Is it good for the country? Is it not good for the country? Ein kol chadash tachas hashemesh. That's King Solomon. There's nothing new under the sun. It's like, oh, these questions begin in 2024 or 20 whatever or whatever. They didn't begin today. This is going back. Not that just because they dealt with it then, it becomes easier to answer. But I think there's also like a little bit of a burden lifted when we know that we didn't create the question, and we don't have to be the first ones to think about sound, reasonable resolutions. We can apply. We have, I don't know if the right word is luxury. We have the benefit of literally, 100 generations of Jewish thought on this and really thoughtful consideration. So we're going to look at the entire picture. We're going to look at U.S. law and immigration over the years and how things have evolved when it comes to immigration, naturalization, and citizenship. We're going to look a little bit into the legal part of it. We're then going to look at scripture, the Torah itself, the Bible. Then we're going to look at Talmudic sources. We'll look at Jewish legal sources. We'll look at ethical sources. And then we'll see how Jewish communities back in the day in real time dealt with very similar questions. And we'll also see, I know it's going to shock you, that different communities led by different rabbinic leaders sometimes took different approaches. I know. Shock fills the room. No one knows what to say. What? Different rabbis might have had different opinions? Yes. And we'll even find, perchance, a distinction between an Ashkenazi way of looking at it and a Sephardi way. And I know what you're thinking. Again, I just can read minds tonight. I can sense it. It's like, what? I thought the only difference in Ashkenaz and Sephardi had to do with rice on Passover. No, it also has to do with immigration. Turns out there are two major issues: rice on Passover and the immigration debate. But all will unfold tonight. and multiple wives, correct? Yeah, but that's out of practice. So more or less. Okay, as far as that. Now, here we go. Here we go. So let's jump in. The first thing I want, okay. If you look at the booklets that are in front of you, and I'm going to put up all the text online, it's quite thick. I would say even if we were to read all the text just at a normative pace, that would be our time. So we're not going to do that, and we're going to skip around a little bit. I'm going to summarize some of them. The good news is you can take this, and I'll email everybody. You can take this and peruse it as you wish. Oh, look, a little marketing on the back of this, but you'll look at that later. So that's for our High Holiday Boot Camp coming up next month. Here is the deal. Here is the deal. When it comes to borders, and I'm sure you've encountered this, whether in conversation, or maybe you've read this, or maybe you've seen somebody talk about this or whatever. There are those that advocate an extreme position that there should be no borders. Have you ever heard of that? Have you ever heard of the no borders, right? So now open up, I'm gonna pull this up. Open up your booklets and look at text number 1. This is an article from The Atlantic in 2015, very articulate and very interesting in framing the argument. And I gotta tell you, I don't necessarily agree with this, but he does a pretty good job. He does a pretty good job. So I want to highlight, again, we're not going to read this all the way through, but I do want to highlight one or two lines. Take a look at the second to last paragraph, okay? That begins with freedom of movement is a basic human right. Okay, you see that? Freedom of movement is a basic human right. If you look at the last line in that paragraph, it says, today we treat as pariahs those governments that refuse to let their people exit. Right? What kind of, give me an example. Which government doesn't let people leave their country? Huh?
Hamas.
North Korea, right? That's the first one that came to me. Mark, what did you say? You had a different one? Hamas. Okay. I said a country. So
No, they wouldn't let people.
Right. Russian Jewry. Right. Good. Excellent. I didn't even think of that. Russian Jewry. Right. All the signs, free Soviet Jewry back in the day. So good. But North Korea today. And so we would say, you don't let people leave? That's crazy. That's Meshuggah. Look how he ends off the article. I look forward to the day when we treat as pariahs those governments that refuse to let people enter. In other words, we look people countries that don't let you leave pariah. You should be free. You should be able to move freely. But what about coming in? Suddenly, no, but you can't come in. So we're not convincing anyone with this argument. I'm not even making this argument in the class. I'm just saying there is a position, right? There is a position that says that there should be absolute freedom of movement, which includes being able to go wherever, whenever, right? Sounds like almost like a Shakira song. Wherever, whenever we're meant to be, something like that. Anyway, right? That should be freedom of movement. Good. Now, so that's how we're starting. But that's not necessarily I would say a standard normative position. Text number 2 introduces us to some shifting perspectives on immigration. I find the research fascinating. I'd like to share it with you. Okay, so here's some relatively recent Pew research, and take a look at what is going on over here. So I'm going to read a little bit of this and kind of skip around. So second paragraph, in that time period, last few decades, opinion about immigrants have shifted dramatically. In our latest national political survey, released in March, 59% of the public say immigrants strengthen the country, while 35% describe them as a burden. In 1994, opinions were nearly the reverse. 63% said immigrants were a burden, and 31% said they strengthened the country. So we see that from, let's say, 94 to 2016, there's a massive shift between like a large majority, either initially in 94 saying that immigrants are a burden, and now you have almost that same number, about 60%, saying that they, on the contrary, strengthen the country. It's almost like those numbers are flipped. But what's interesting is, and we are not getting it, just my disclaimer, we're not getting to politics and all that stuff. However, let's just quote some numbers. between 94 and 2005, Republicans and Democrats' views of immigrants tracked one another closely. Beginning around 2006, however, they began to diverge. In October that year, the partisan gap between Republicans and Democrats grew to 15 percentage points. Since then, share of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents saying that immigrants strengthened the country steadily increased from 49% then to 78% now, while the share with this view among Republicans and Republican leaders has shown little change, 34% then, 35% today. So it seems like those that identify as Democrats or Democratic-leaning independents are vast. There's a huge number, almost 80% are saying that immigrants strengthen as opposed to are a burden to the country. So it's interesting just to see how, how things have public opinion or U.S. positions amongst the populace have kind of flipped, and also to see how that's kind of become a partisan a distinction. What we're going to do, we're not getting into politics. So now I want to trace the law of the land, kind of how things have evolved in the U.S. vis-a-vis citizenship and naturalization and immigration. And then we're going to get into the Torah piece of it. And there's a lot to talk about. I mean, how old is the country? It's like a few hundred years old, right? So we live,
250.
Yeah. We're at 250. We're almost 250. 1776, right? Wait, what are we planning? Guys, are we planning a bash? 2026?
Yeah.
Where's the logo? Can we get this rolled out? There's got to be a logo and a coin. Huh? I'm not making a logo. No, I've got so many logos to make. Are you kidding me? I've got plenty of design to work on for my classes. I'm not working on a national design. Let someone else do that. However, I will say that 250 years seems like a long time. That long, but it's long enough that things can evolve. So I wrote in my notes, I'm going to pull out my notes. Okay, you guys ready? Here's a brief tour on how immigration naturalization has shifted over the years. So in 1790, the law of the land was that citizenship or naturalization happens after 2 years. So if you live in the US for 2 years, after 2 years, you can become a citizen. However, the caveat is only if you were a free white man. Then 2 years. Huh? Good question. Landowning or not landowning? It's text 3B. I don't know that I want to read it though. This is the 1790 Naturalization Act. Text 3B. After 2 years, may become a citizen thereof. Okay, I'd have to be a good character. All right, listen. Somewhere, any alien being a free white person who shall have resided within the limits and under jurisdiction of the U.S. term of 2 years may be admitted to become a citizen thereof on application, etc. It doesn't say landowner. With voting. Okay. Hey, at least we believed in free rights, like all the way through from the beginning. Okay, so that's 1790. Then we move on in 1870. So it's kind of like a while later, so 80 years later. So then this is after the Civil War, so 1870, and there's no text. We don't have a text for this one, but you take my word for it. In 1870, the law was passed that those of African descent can become naturalized as well. So that was, again, a post-Civil War new addition to the law. Okay, in 1875, we have the first time that we have overt restrictions placed on naturalization and citizenship. 1875, the law now bans certain people, like criminals, etc., from becoming citizens. Actually, I think it was even banning from coming into the country. Criminals, etc., are now banned. Now there's a first immigration ban is happening in 1875. In 1882, there's an immigration ban on Chinese laborers, with the thought that that would endanger the jobs of U.S. citizens. In 1898, there is a court case that goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. And we have a text over here. The text is text number 7, U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark, where basically this fellow, Wong Kim Ark, was born in the U.S., his family was originally from China. He was born in the U.S., I think in San Francisco, So based on the law at that point, he had become a US citizen. He was naturalized by birth in the US, went back to China for, I don't know, a certain amount of time. And upon his return was told, he's not a citizen. He can't come back. That's it. Sorry, my friend. They said you can't come back. So he obviously, well, not obviously, but he fought the case, and it went up and up and up, and ultimately went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that indeed he was not to be considered a U.S. Hold on, is citizen. Oh no, they said he is a citizen. He is a citizen. Okay, they affirmed that he is, huh? This is 1898.
This is the case that was perfect.
Correct.
Oh, it was just, I thought you referred to. Because it's also referred to in text 6.
Text 6 was the lower court's opinion. Yeah, that says that. I'm just trying to skim through now. Which was it? Here we go. Yeah. So text 6 says, I am the opinion that Wong Kim Ark is a citizen of the U.S. in the meaning of the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment. Text 7 once again affirms that. The U.S. Supreme Court affirms that. Okay, in 1917, let's fast forward to 1917. There is restrictions placed on immigration via a literacy test. So that's in 1917. 1921, immigration quotas are first developed. 1921. Harsher quotas are developed in 1924, based on an 1890 census. Basically, it was like this. They took a census. Originally, it was the 1910 census, and then they rolled it back to 1890. It basically said that it works with 3% of that country's population. So up to 3%. If you look at, let's say, the 1890 census, how many Polish people of Polish origin lived in the U.S. and take that number, 3% of that number, that's what we'll allow in on an annual basis. So, yeah, a lot of it was in effect. I don't know the intent. I'm not familiar enough to say the intent, but certainly it served to keep a lot of Jews out. Yes, that's correct. To keep a lot of Jews out of the country, and that was in place. When you hear about ships being turned back, in World War II and all that stuff, and why did that happen? What was going on? A lot of that was because of these quotas, bills that were passed, and again in 1921 and then in 1924, even stricter quotas about how many and who can come in. In 1952, we have the McCarran-Walter Act that upheld the quotas. In 1965, the Immigration and Naturalization Act finally abolished the quotas, and that was again in 1965. And of course, there's more to talk about, but there's been a lot of ups and downs when in the U.S. In U.S. history. It's gone from only recognizing a citizen's free whites to allowing citizenship for those of African descent, to banning Chinese workers, to establishing strict immigration quotas, rescinding the Chinese ban, which I didn't mention, but at some point that happened, that the Chinese worker ban was rescinded, and then the quotas were abolished, and finally to opening immigration, allowing family members to reunite and encouraging skilled foreign workers to come to the U.S. And as of today, nearly 15% of Americans are foreign-born, up from 4.7 in 1970. And the big debate is, of course, should we open the borders more or tighten them more? Should we be more open or more restricted? 1.5, yeah. I mean, it's not exactly 15. It's somewhere between 11 and 15, somewhere in that space. Yeah.
Can you clarify? We're talking just about citizenship as opposed to legal status, like green card type stuff. You talking about citizenship?
I think so, that's already a path to citizenship. So I think that is we talk about a green.
I'm talking about the Chinese 1890. I mean, they helped build the railroads, for example.
Right. You're saying, when there was a ban on Chinese workers coming in? No, I believe that was straight up. Not straight up ban, not about citizenship, about entering the country.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. No. So I mean, it depends what and when. But that specific question that you're asking about the Chinese worker ban, that was straight up entering the country.
Rabbi.
Ray, 1 second. Yeah. So we're going to talk about, I think, the larger picture, which is, as a society, should the mindset be to allow more people in or less people in? And within that framework, obviously, then you create laws and rules about, okay, so if we are allowing, how are we allowing? What's the process? Who gets to enjoy the process? What happens if you skip the process? Can you get back in line? Are you ahead of the line? I mean, all of these are derivatives, but we're going to go back to the core concept from a Jewish perspective, from a Torah perspective, right? Jewish values. Are Jewish values more open and amenable to this, or more, let's make things more difficult or make things a little bit easier? Ray, you wanted to say something, jump in.
Yeah, partly medical had a lot to do with it at certain times. I know if you had a problem with your eyes, they sent you back. Some kind of problem with the eyes.
Interesting. You're saying you had to be fit and healthy to be admitted.
Right. Otherwise, you're sent back to where you came from.
Yeah. It's been an interesting history here in the U.S., and it reflects, I think, different opinions and shifting perspectives. Let's now, after this very long preamble, let's now jump into the Jewish text. And we're not going to find a single Jewish text that is like the definitive perspective, but we're going to try to put together a somewhat comprehensive view of these issues based on a mosaic of Jewish sources, Torah sources, really. And so let's begin. I'm going to read these sources. I'm going to kind of, move a little bit quickly through them because there's a lot of sources. And so let's jump in. Text number 9. We start with the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. This is the story brought in the Torah in Genesis, chapter 11 of Genesis. And it talks about, chapter 11, not about the liquidation of that effort to create the tower. So what is the story and what is the tower? So let's jump in. All right, here we go. One second. Pull this up. Text number 9. Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." So they were trying to build a unified culture, a unified civilization for all people at that time to live together. And what's not quoted here is the end of the story where God is displeased with this effort and he confuses the language and basically ensures that they separate into their different nations with their different languages. Right. And this is the origin of what we would call, in biblical terms, the 70 nations, along with the 70 nations. Was it exactly 70? Again, I wasn't there. I don't know. But it says that it was divided into 70 nations with 70 languages. The idea that it wasn't just one, it was diverse. Now, the question is, why did God have a problem? From a biblical perspective, what was the problem with people wanting to band together? It seems like a great thing. I mean, like, I remember seeing a Super Bowl commercial or something, and everyone was on a field. And it's like, if I could buy the world a Coke, right? Because Coke was going to obviously solve all the problems. And remember that? Yes. And like everyone, kumbaya.
Yeah.
What was it? Oh, so maybe I didn't see it in the 80s. I wasn't around then. They may have reissued it. Okay. I remember at some points.
Yes.
I can't remember when or how, but I just remember it's got a catchy tune. It felt right. And the question is, so what's wrong with that? It seems like a great initiative. It's like, let's all get together, not harm each other, live in perfect harmony. What could go wrong? And God's like, I don't like that. Well, I mean, I hate to say it as a rabbi, please don't isolate this audio, whoever's listening to this, but like, what's wrong with God? Now everyone's going to do it, right? But like, what's up with God? Like, that seems kind of crazy. God's like, nope, too much getting along. Let's break this up. What's wrong? So the commenters explain that it's not that God doesn't like when people get along. It's that God values diversity. This is very important. That it's, like America's called the melting pot. You know what the problem with the melting conceptually? I'm not talking about America right now, but when you use the word melting pot, you know what that implies? everyone loses their identity and become like, what happens if you take all the crayons and melt them into one liquid? It's just like I had such like diverse colors. I had like, I don't know, I bought the tropical pack. I don't know, whatever. I don't know how they sell crayons at this point, but like I had the
everybody
pastels and like, huh?
Everybody becomes a cheese fondue.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. It's like everyone looks the same. So yes, we know the advantage of a melting pot is that people are getting along. The disadvantage is that to get along, what's happening in that context is everyone's losing their identity, which means, oh, it's kind of like, okay, here's my analogy. It's kind of like, you ever have a cholent on Shabbos? You know what a cholent is? Okay. If you haven't had it, consider yourself lucky. I'm kidding. No, cholent's great. Cholent's great. But cholent is an interesting food because a cholent, okay, here's the deal. I wasn't intending on doing this, but you know, I'm a rabbi. I can't resist an opportunity to share an interesting thing, especially that has to do with Jewish law. Okay, so there is one of the rules of Shabbat is no cooking on Shabbat. However, there's a caveat. You can put up food before Shabbat, and it can cook into Shabbat. It's not even a loophole because you're not cooking on Shabbat. Cooking means that you're applying food to fire. I'm not applying food to fire. I so did that 5 minutes before Shabbat. Like that was way before. So many people today, and even back in the day, you take a crock pot, slow cooker, right? You throw your stuff in, you throw some beans. Okay, here's the classic recipe. Some potatoes, some barley, some beans, some meat, if that's your persuasion. Then you put
onions.
Thank you, Mom. Some onions, some kishka. What's kishka? It's not even worth talking about what that is.
Right.
And kishka is usually vegetable stuff. And then whatever you throw it in. And honestly, a cholent is whatever you have. It's like, what goes into a cholent? What do you have? I mean, what you have like I think I even said this recently at a class. You have a can of Coke, throw it in. Some barbecue sauce, absolutely add it. Ketchup, yes, 100%. Right? That old shoe that you were looking, no, do not throw that in. No, stop there with the items, with the household objects. But it kind of goes in, and then it cooks for 24 hours or less, whatever, because you'll eat it Shabbat lunch. Oh, Friday night you can keep food hot because you just cooked it. But like Shabbat afternoon, you want something hot because like who wants to eat cold cuts all day? It's so, I don't know, it's so old school. So you want to have something hot. You got your slow cooker going. You pull it off. 2 p.m. You sit down, or 12 p.m. whenever you eat lunch. You pull off the cholent and you open it up. And I'll tell you this: it might be a potato, it might be a barley thing, whatever piece of barley. It all tastes the same. Doesn't matter what you're eating. After 24 hours, the whole thing tastes. It looks the same. It tastes the same. It's mush, and it's whatever. It is what it is. And I'm not knocking cholent, although it seems clear like I am. However, what I am saying is that a melting pot means that everyone just becomes the same. And although there may be some advantage to that, there is also a disadvantage. And let's get back to God's intention in breaking up the party of the Tower of Babel. Everyone's getting together. It's great. Everyone's got their boom boxes, as it were. They're building. It's amazing. Everyone's listening to the same music, speaking the same language. And God says, break up the party. I created a world of diversity. Y'all stop being so similar. I want different people doing different things. And part of that is living in different places, speaking different languages, having different pursuits, different cultures. There's something beautiful about people who celebrate their individuality, their individualism, people who celebrate their heritage, people who celebrate what makes them uniquely them and distinct from the other culture, the other civilization. And this, it's clear from biblical precedent, is what God wants. And so I ask you, is God pro-borders or anti-borders? What would you say? Pro-borders. Now, whoa, 1 second, time out. I didn't say lock down the borders. But is God pro? Because the article from the Atlantic that we skimmed over would say, no borders, you live on planet Earth, you should go wherever you want, and should be just one nation, one nationality of people. Whereas the Torah seems to clear, I think it's pretty clear, clearly indicating that indeed God wants there to be different nations, different people, different cultures, different languages, all of that is a good thing. Let's take a look at the commentaries. Let me pull this up. Lest you think I'm making this up, let's actually see how the commentaries derive these very lessons, text 10a and 10b. God blessed, another biblical verse. God blessed Adam and Eve and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. God blessed humankind, says the Ramban Nachmanides. God blessed humankind that they should fill the entire earth and that the clans should separate from each other to the ends of the earth. But they should not stay all in one place, as the builders of the tower would later intend to do. Staying in one place means that you're not diversifying. God wants diversification. Take a look. All right, text 11, text 12a, I'm sure text 12b, all speak to the same thing. Oh, 12c also. Wow, look at this. Yeah, for sure.
Because.
Hold on one second, let me repeat. Joel is disagreeing. Go.
So if there's an initial dispersal.
Yeah.
And then there's not the mixing thereafter, then instead of having this one non-diverse group, we have 70 non-diverse groups, right? There's 70 groups, but they become static in themselves, unless you continue to have cross-pollinization.
Very interesting.
We'll just, just gonna.
I like that. Can I repeat that? Joel is saying that, hold on, what happens if everybody just retreats to their own borders and then within that border just stays the same? Then you have now a mini Tower of Babel within one nation of groupthink and group speak. You need further kind of mixing within the borders. So you have different spaces, but then mixing. See, what you're advocating for is kind of like what I'm advocating for, which is not shalom, but a chicken soup. And I'll tell you why. Because in a chicken soup, you know what you're eating, right? It's, oh, that's a sweet potato. It tastes like a sweet potato. It's like, oh, zucchini. I got it. It's zucchini. Are you with me on this? You're right. But you're mixing. So not that there's no mixing. And that's why I said the lesson that I take, that I extract from those biblical stories that we just said, is not that there shouldn't be any ability to move between borders, but that the concept of borders are not immoral. You with me? In other words, some would say that the concept of borders is wrong. It's ungodly, right? God created a world open. And God himself says, look, I like there to be some borders, but that doesn't preclude moving between that, which is what the collab, yeah.
If you read 10b though, the last sentence of it says that they should not stay all in one place, it's built into the tower of later to do. I would read that to mean that while he wants to separate, he wants them then to mix again so they have the free flowing of ideas and they.
You guys are agreeing?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm just saying you have it.
And yet you're sitting at different tables. Interesting. You're still collaborating from different tables. Right, so you're right. You're saying from the text itself, from text. So I'm going to just bring everybody online into this. So text 10b concludes with they should not stay. God says they should not stay in all in one place, as the builders of the tower will later intend to do, but rather diversifying into distinct spaces. Look, I think there is something about having an opportunity to nurture and to foster your individuality as distinct from the other. I think it's a good thing. I think, even within a family, if you have, let's say, a few kids, if you try to raise them all the same, identical, if you don't give space to their individualism, right? So then it does a disservice to the kids, because even though they're in the same family and from the same parents, they are unique, right? They are their own person. And so it's almost like giving them their space to be unique and to be individual is a good thing. At the same time, it doesn't mean that we're not one family, that then comes together and that we don't share our unique gifts and our individualism with each other. It doesn't mean that we remain separate, but it does mean that there's something about having a space within which to operate. Jump in.
So I think you're advocating for instead of a trunk, a stew, where each ingredient has its own personal benefit to the whole.
Right. Well, I'll be honest. I think of stew as chalent, but then maybe I'm not a stew guy. Maybe I don't need enough stew.
Doesn't cook.
Okay, got it. Right. But my analogy is chicken soup, where, the broth is clear. You can see the distinction, and, this is orange, this is green, this is, what is that again? I'm kidding. But right, you can see, yeah.
Two things. Number one, just like statistically, I've read studies of like the more diverse a group is, the better or more effective the group is at like getting things done and
Yeah.
coming up with new ideas. But number two, I skimmed ahead to text 12C.
Ah.
It seems to be very against intermingling.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, text 12, I think there's a balance between the two, and this is what we're going to try to find. So let me just repeat. So first of all, I want to focus on what you said, the first thing, because that's so this side of the room is definitely on team, I would say cross-pollinating. And I think that we've discovered that this is true. Because when you take, like even with science and but a lot of advancements that are made when you take people from different industries or different spaces, different disciplines, you put them together in a room. So for example, you take, I don't know, a shoe person with a music person, and the next thing you know, you have a better looking shoe, or you have something interesting that comes out of a collaboration. Huh?
I like shoes.
I'm not speaking of any specific shoe collaboration with a musician that may or may not have been not friendly to the Jews in recent times. However, I am saying
You have tap
that-
dancing.
that before that, right? That before that, it made a lot of money. It's Kanye. But anyway, the point is that but it's not even that. It's it was already discovered hundreds of years ago that like when we take people from different disciplines and we put them together, right? And we kind of work with different disciplines together, it's a good thing. Now, I think you referenced in your second one 12C. So text 12C, okay, let me pull this up. We'll just analyze it very quickly. Because look, I told you there's not going to be one definitive, text here that like speaks to all the points, but there are going to be ideas that we can pull and kind of blend together. Speaking of this concept of blending. So I'm just going to read this. On the verse, Balaam saw Israel dwelling according to his tribes. Rashi comments, he saw each tribe dwelling in their respective quarters and that they were not intermingled. What is the virtue in this? Abraham, this is a long text though. This is a long text. Now I realize it's like a 2-pager. Okay. So, yeah, I think we're gonna have to skip. So, basically it says that different people spiritually have different types of souls, right? Some have chesed souls, gvura souls, different temperatures, different temperaments of souls, and then each one has their own and has their unique way of serving God. So if we look at the last paragraph, this is the deeper meaning after all of the stuff that we skipped. Now we understand the deeper meaning of Balaam saw Israel dwelling according to his tribes. Each tribe recognized its uniqueness and served God according to its potential. Had they been intermingled, each would have imitated the other, even though such service would have had no relation to the root of their souls and would have offered their souls no rectification. I think there's a lot of truth to this. I don't think it's the only truth. When I say that, I mean this. I think there's something to be said about a person knowing who they are, optimizing their own character, their own personality, their own way, and not feeling the need to copy someone else and be inauthentic. Like the Kutzker Rebbe once said, great Hasidic rabbi, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you. You with me so far? I'll do it again. If I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I'm not I, and you're not you. However, if I am I because I am I, you are you because you are you, then I'm I, and you are you. And now we can have a fabrega. Sorry, and now we can get together, right? Which means, I don't know, maybe. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. When did he live? After the Kutzker Rebbe. See, he got it. All good things come from, Hasidic rabbis from the old country. The point is that there is something to be said, something that's beautiful about a person having space to develop their own interests, their own talents, their own unique approach, and not feeling they have to conform into someone else's space or to conform to the way that someone else does it, because that so often curtails a person's own ability to shine. Now, does that mean that we should all live as islands? I am a rock. I am an island, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries or cries. Cries, I think cries.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No worries. Either way, the point of this is this Simon and Garfunkel. What are we even saying here? Okay, good. So the point of this is that I think both are true and both truths are important. But the concept of the very basic question of are borders moral or immoral I think it's clearly answered that there not only is it moral, it seems to be divinely sanctioned that there be borders. Not that they necessarily be ironclad, something dragons, right? Like you can't go, don't like that line is, but you can't go past the border under any circumstances. We're not saying that yet. We're not saying that. I don't know that we're saying that at all tonight. It's just the concept of there being separate, distinct people, nations that have their own way of doing things. It's almost like clans and families doing their own thing. That is not inherently something immoral. Now let's keep on going further. So now that we see that Torah is not opposed to borders and nationalities, let's see what the nature of those borders should look like. And we have now text 13a. 13a is a very important text. Here we go. And this is specifically taught regarding the land of Israel. It says, your bolts shall be of iron and copper. Your bolts shall be of iron and copper. What does that actually mean? So Rashi explains that this is referring to the nature of the border, that the border should be bolted down. In other words, should be closed, iron and copper, it should be sealed tight. With this verse, says Rashi 13b, and Rashi, of course, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki is the most prominent Jewish biblical commentary that there is, that there's ever been. And he says the following: with this verse, Moses addresses all of Israel. He is saying that Israel's mighty warriors shall dwell in the border cities, and this will serve to lock up the land. Enemies would be unable to enter, as if the land were sealed with locks and bolts made of iron and copper. Basically, put the strong people at the border and make sure that no one that shouldn't be coming in comes in. And so I ask you the question, based on this verse and its commentary, does Torah seem to advocate for closed or open borders? What would you say?
Close to enemy.
Oh, thank you for the caveat. Secure, right. Let's say secure. Secure borders, is that wrong? Is that not? Seems to be advocating that that is okay. At the same time, right? Dasi, make a very important point, and that is secure from enemies. We're talking here about enemies, and in the context of the original land of Israel, and I guess even the current land of Israel, right? Maybe don't change. That then Israel was under existential threats, or was potentially facing existential threats. And in that situation, the Torah clearly says that having secure borders, keep out enemies, is not, there's nothing wrong with that. On the contrary, it is a mandate. Now, but how do we apply that in a situation where we're not facing an existential threat from immigration? Let's say the US, it's not like, well, okay, I guess who you asked, but like not necessarily facing an existential threat. It's more of like economic reasons or other reasons. Does that have the same, lock it up like iron and copper? Is that the same? Not necessarily. That was talking about an existential threat, and we would have to figure out how we apply it. And so we move forward, we continue on and do some more analysis. Now, the next text we're going to do is text 14a. Very interesting story in the Torah. So here, this is before the last text. So this is while the Jewish people were on their way marching toward the promised land. And as they were making their way to the land that would become known as the land of Israel, so they encountered other nations along the way. In other words, geographically, there were other nations in between where they were and the land that would become the land of Israel. And so they asked those nations, including one of them called Edom, and they asked Edom, said, can we go through on the way, on the march to Israel? Can we perchance go through your land? You need to know that Edom is a descendant of Esau, who is the brother of Jacob, who is the father of the Jewish people. And so what we're talking about, cousins, but cousins are essentially siblings that are just the next generation down. Correct? Does that make sense? Am I mixing up family relationships? I don't think I am, right? Right. The kid, right. But essentially, right, Edom is to Israel as Esau is to Jacob, right? That's where they come from, and they were twin brothers, and this is their children, grandchildren, whatever it is, right? A few generations later. And so here we go. And so the Jewish people petition the cousins, right? The cousins, what could possibly go wrong? Moses sent messengers from Kadesh. Opa. No worries. Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. So says your brother Israel. See, now we have the whole space to ourselves. Now we'll raise Moses. So says your brother Israel, you know all of the hardship that has befallen us. Moses goes into the whole Exodus song and dance, right? He pulls the Egypt card. It's interesting, right? Trying to gain some sympathy. Our fathers went down, it sounds like the Seder. Our fathers went down to Egypt, and we sojourned in Egypt for a long time, and the Egyptians mistreated us and their forefathers. We cried out to God, and he heard our voice. He sent a messenger and took, well, that's Moses, right? Talking about himself, a little self-referential action going on. He sent the messenger and took us out of Egypt, and now we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Let us now pass through your land. We will not pass through fields or vineyards. We're not going to trample your crops, right? Nor will we drink water from the wells. We will walk along the road of the king's choosing, and we will turn neither to the right nor to the left until we have passed through your territory. We're not going to step on your flowers. We're not going to eat your food. We're not going to drink your water. We're just going to stay on the highway and just go through it. Edom replied, you shall not pass through me, lest I go out towards you with the sword. In other words, you dare try. The Israelites replied, we will go along the road outside the cities, and if we or our livestock drink any of your water, we will pay for it. It's going to be good for your economy even. We only want to pass through on foot, nothing else. Nothing else. But he said, Edom said, you shall not pass through. Edom came out toward them with a vast force and with a strong hand. Edom refused to allow Israel to cross through his territory, so Israel turned away from him. And here we see a nation, a sovereign nation, who says to a people looking to pass through, you will not gain entry to our land. We are closing our borders to y'all. And that was an awkward y'all, I must say. Sounded way too northern for my taste. But anyway, what is the implication? Kosher or not kosher? Well, we didn't like it. It doesn't imply that they were wrong then. What were we gonna say, James?
I was just gonna say, if we say that when we set up borders, that they're gonna be iron and copper, we should expect other people to have iron and copper on their borders.
Correct. Now, although that other verse was said after this one, this story came first.
You can't apply to one.
I completely agree, right? So we got to be consistent. So if we want to say, oh, we're locking it down, we don't want anyone through, well, they also said that. And again, there's no implication in the narrative, right? Israel turned away from Israel and say, you're violating, our rights to go through wherever we want. They didn't say that, because at the end of the day, a sovereign nation, again, from a biblical perspective, it seems to indicate that a nation has the right to decide who comes in, how they come in, when they come in, and they decide who, what, where, when it comes to their borders. Now, let's take a look at why Edom refused entry. What was actually their ration? Was it just they said, no, this is my land, you can't come in, or was it a little bit more nuanced? So take a look at the Midrash. Midrash is an ancient text that really goes through and explains a lot of the biblical narrative. Well, yeah, maybe, right? old fights being carried on for the next generation. No, but take a look at what the Midrash says. Edom refused to allow Israel to cross through his territory. Why did he refuse? Asked the Midrash rhetorically. And the answer is because the Edomites were afraid of the Jews. They said, if they destroyed the Egyptians in whose land they had dwelt, they certainly will attempt to do the same to us, considering that our father Esau despised their father Jacob. As it says, Esau hated Jacob, and Esau said in his heart, I will slay my brother Jacob. Basically, they thought that the Jewish people were planning, not far from what you said, that the Jews were going to either exact revenge or just otherwise try to destroy Edom. And they had been successful with Egypt, bringing Egypt to its knees with 10 plagues, etc. And so they feared for their very national survival. Once again, according to the Midrash, this rises not just to standard border decision in or out, this rises to the level of a perceived existential threat, which tells us that from a Jewish perspective, from a Torah perspective, it seems that when a nation believes that it is threatened existentially, or maybe threatened existentially, it has full rights to lock down its border. It is not immoral. It is not illegal. It is rather prudent for that to happen. And so now the question becomes, how might we apply this to the US? What constitutes, as I asked a few minutes ago, what constitutes a threat on that level, an existential threat? I think if we look at, the modern state of Israel, we might have a conversation about that, a conversation about, borders and where borders should be and how borders should be. And that's certainly an interesting conversation. It's not the one we're going to have tonight. The question we're going to have tonight is about when we think about the United States and we think about the question about secure borders, not secure borders, and we think about, the issues at stake. Well, if the borders were, let's say, a little bit more relaxed and open, what is the threat? Is it an existential threat? Is it a perceived existential threat that's not really an existential threat? Is it really an existential threat? And I think you would have to look at that carefully and make a decision. Now, I'm not necessarily opening this up because I don't think this is a place for it, to have a conversation about whether it is, and if we're having, immigrants from southern borders, does that mean that our country is going to be, what the point of this is that when there is an existential threat, Torah has no problem saying, lock the borders, iron and copper. Edom says stay out. They were wrong. Oh, I probably should mention. They were wrong because the Jewish people have been told by God not to start up with Edom because they are your brother, / cousin, right? It's the South, I'm kidding, right? They are mishpacha, they're your family. So as your family, thank you. So as your family, don't start up with the Edomites. But the Edomites didn't know that. And so it was natural for them, perhaps, either it was or it wasn't, but they felt like this was really dangerous. If they open their borders, they may no longer exist. And thus, it seems that Torah is saying they have full right to lock the border.
So,
again,
Rabbi,
Irena, go.
Yeah, so I was just about to ask you if there was, and you just answered. If there was in the Torah a difference between perceived threat and the true threat. And
Excellent.
From what you're saying, the onus of the situation falls into the person that's going to be that will be attacked, and it's whether it's true or not true. If you feel you're going to be attacked, then you whatever.
Okay, yes, but that is what I implied a moment ago, with the caveat that I don't know that this opens up to everyone saying, well, I feel threatened, and even though nothing supports that threat, I just feel uncomfortable and I feel threatened, and therefore that's it. I don't know that would fall into the same category. I think there was good reason why Edom would feel threatened. The Jewish people had an interesting track record in kind of, again, bringing down Egypt. There was some history, speaking of Chalent, there was some beef between Esav and Yaakov, right, between the the twin brothers. And so I think they genuinely felt fear. Now, it actually wouldn't have played out as they feared, but they had good reason to fear. I think that the gray area, and I'm not saying either way, I agree with you, it's a gray area. I think that was your question. Yeah. And I want to make sure that I don't sound too definitive, because there is a big gray area. The gray area is what if you don't know if it's an existential threat? It might be, you can run some data points and say, oh, this will, destroy us. But other data points, you can say, well, it's not actually going to destroy us. It's just maybe, I don't know, cause some discomfort, and maybe we have to pivot or readjust. The question then is, does it fall into the same category? We're not done. I mean, we have a ton of content to cover. So what we're establishing, we only can establish what we can establish. And I think it's important to know what we can, as anything can be definitive, I think it's important to establish what we can say, but also what we cannot say. What we can say is that borders inherently are not immoral, number one. Border security is a need. However, the source text that we have in Torah is where what's at stake is really an existential threat. When it's not on that level, then to what level should borders be secure versus relaxed? We don't yet have information. We have a lot more sources. Yeah.
So how do you true this up with Abraham when he welcomed the three strangers? He didn't know if they were threats or not, but he welcomed them, he brought them to his house, he told us where.
Yeah. Well, Abraham himself was an immigrant. He went from Haran. He was told Lech Lecha, right? Third Torah portion of the Torah. He was told to emigrate to Canaan. We later come to the land of Israel. And then there's a famine in the land. He then goes to Egypt. I mean, this guy was, you should see his passport. He's got stamps from everywhere. This guy is just like he's collecting, customs,
He
whatnot.
welcomed strangers without borders.
Correct. So we're gonna get there. We're gonna talk about the idea of hospitality and openness. Now, let's keep on going. Again, we have a lot of content here. So I want to, to just summarize, there are 4 points that I think we have developed. Number one, nations and borders are inherently a good thing. It's good to have that. Borders must be secured against enemies and existential threats. Immigrants, as we saw, a point that I didn't mention, but it's in my summary. Immigrants must ask permission before entering. Where do we see that? The Jewish people Moses sent a message to Edom saying, can we pass through? That means you can't just walk in. You got to respect the borders of another country. Oh, that's a good thing. Oh, I'm glad I wrote that. And then the 4th thing is governments can refuse entry under certain circumstances. And we saw some. The question is, what are all the parameters of that? We don't yet have that information, so we need to look further. Now let's look at economic concerns, because obviously, existential, if we're talking about war or survival, that's one thing. Well, what about economic concerns? What about, we don't believe that immigrants are really gonna destroy blow up the country. But the question is if they're gonna make the economy suffer. Is that existential threat? Is that grounds for locking people out versus allowing people in? Where do economic concerns fit in this calculus? And so we're going to look at a source text in the Talmud. And the Talmud talks about not necessarily borders, but the idea of business infringement. And this is going to be fascinating. I think it's fascinating. And at this point, y'all are subject to my fascination. So here we are. Text 15. Take a look, Talmud Tractate Bava Batra. Take a look at what the Talmud says. I told you we would go through scripture. We would go through Midrash. We're going through Talmud now. And so here we go. The party rolls on. Listen to this. Okay, even before we read, I'm going to tell you this straight up. There are going to be 3 different ways to understand this. And I know what you're thinking. 3 ways, there's 3 paragraphs, 3 sentences here. How could there possibly be 3 ways to understand it? Have you ever met a Jew? I mean, seriously, let's go. Rabbi Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, said, here we go. And that's the first line. There can't be an argument at that. I mean, this is the guy who said it. Okay, it is quite clear to me that residents of a town can prevent an outsider from setting up a competing business in their town. You guys with me so far? Yes.
Yes.
If, however, the person who wishes to open the new business pays local taxes, the residents cannot prevent this. You tell me what this means. You tell me what this means. Someone offer, yeah.
What does prevent this mean? Prevent this could mean you can either prevent them from paying the taxes or prevent them from setting up the business.
I'm asking you. I've got my own 3 ways of understanding this. Well, hold on, wait, slow down. If they pay taxes where? Which local government?
Town.
One second. You have a town and someone wants to move. Someone who's an outsider who doesn't live in the town. That's what an outsider means, right? So someone, an outsider wants to open a business here.
They have to pay taxes here.
Okay, so you're saying, so pay local taxes here. Then they can do what? If they pay local taxes, then they can?
Residents can't prevent them from opening their business.
Do they have to move here or can they just operate the business here without moving here? Right, good, okay. So what's interesting is that the Talmud, the ruling of the Talmud is vague. What we see clearly here is that you cannot Walmart this situation. I'm kidding. No, I'm not attacking. But like you cannot just operate, open up things without paying. I guess Walmart pays local taxes, but without paying local taxes, like that's not kosher. You can't just operate, take away, shut down businesses because you're operating a franchise and you're coming in, you're bulldozing. By the way, I have an idea for a place that does alterations very quickly. The Swift Tailor. Somebody open this up and franchise me. I'm kidding. Guys, Swift Tailor, Swift. No, really, that's where you guys draw the line? Right here, that's where it happened. Okay, we're moving on. Okay, all right. Oh, maybe I need to get more time for this to land. That's the thing. All right, I'm feeling a little hurt. Now, there's 3 ways to understand this. Number 1, you ready? Number 1. And we're going from the most relaxed way of understanding this to the most strict way of understanding this. And by the way, online, I'm keeping this up online so that you can see this as I read into this text, into this ruling, okay? Number 1, the first understanding of this Talmudic ruling is that as long as the business pays local taxes, then residents cannot block the new business from operating. And I know what you're thinking, that's literally what it says, but stay with me, right? And that's what Janice says, right? So that if you open up, you can open up the business, you don't live there, you can open up the business, operate the business in a different town, as long as you are feeding into the local economy by paying the tax in the local economy, kosher. No one can stop it. Second understanding is stricter. And it says, no, the business person, the business owner must move to the town and must live there and then pay taxes. Then they cannot block the person from moving to town. So if you already moved and you're paying local taxes and now you want to open a business, then you're allowed to do that. The third position is the strictest and says the residents can always block outsiders from moving in and opening up shop. Unless a local who's already there and paying taxes, unless there's a local already there paying taxes that wants to open up the community business, then that cannot be stopped. You see how that's read in? Can you read that in? Say it again.
No.
Look at the last paragraph. If, however, the person who wishes to open the new business pays local taxes, that means that they're not an outsider. In other words, this reading says they are not an outsider, they are a local resident. Because the larger question is about competing businesses. There's something called Hasagas Gvul, which means, listen, I'm not saying it's the most literal reading, but these are literal three readings. Look, the question is like this. If somebody has, I was gonna say a tailor shop, but I've already burned that bridge. If someone has a shoe shop, what's a shoe shop? Shoe repair? What are we talking about here? Shoe store. Thank you. Someone has a shoe store and they're doing, they have a shoe store. And you're like, oh, I want to open up a shoe store. You're gonna, let's use food. Food's a better example. Somebody has a kosher deli. There's one kosher deli in town. Somebody else says, I want to open up a kosher deli. And the first guy's like, you open a kosher deli, I'm not going to survive. You with me? So the Talmud says, if it's an outsider, we say, you can't open up a kosher deli. You can't shut down this guy because you want, open up in your own city. Why are you coming to this city to shut down a guy? But if it's someone from the city, I'm explaining the third position. If it's someone who lives there, who's paying local taxes, they live in the city, and you want to open up another deli, you can't stop another person from town opening up a deli. Let the best deli win, as one does. That's the third reading.
So you have to pay the taxes first before you.
But that's even true the second way. I think it's important to understand the three different ways. Way number one is, it's the easiest. You can live in Chattanooga and run the deli in Atlanta as long as you're paying taxes in Atlanta. That's one position. Second one is no. You gotta move to Atlanta and then operate the business. 3 is we can stop you from moving to Atlanta if we know that you're coming to open a business. It's only if you've already been living here, then you can open up the deli. Are you with me, the distinction? Yes? According to the third position, the strictest position, you can stop immigration if it's going to hurt local business, if it's gonna take away jobs. You see how we got there? I don't mind running through it again, doing the three positions again. Let's run through it again, yes? Should we do it again? I'm gonna back up and we'll do it again. Okay, position number one is that, I was just Chattanooga and Atlanta, and as far, they definitely were not dealing with those businesses back in the day, but Chattanooga wants to open up a deli in Atlanta, there's one deli, he wants to open up a deli, so we say, you cannot open a deli unless you're paying local taxes, and then in which case, let the best deli win. Second understanding is, no, you have to first move, and we will let you, but you first have to move to Atlanta and then become a resident, and then you can open up shop and open up the deli and pay local taxes. The third position is, no, if we know your intention, we will not let you move to open up a deli because we have a deli. If you already have been living here and you have not expressed your intention to, or you've always been living here and now you want to open up a deli, we cannot stop you. By the way, I switched in my, you saw me go through this, to food, because you should know that this is a serious question here in Atlanta. And the AKC, for example, the Atlanta Kashrus Commission, will not give a hechsher, will not certify an establishment that it feels is going to harm an existing kosher business, restaurant business, etc. This is, now, where does that come from? Is that it just is what it is, because there's an interest to keep small business, local business, Jewish-owned business, kosher businesses healthy and vibrant and not create. And that's why typically in Atlanta, if a new restaurant opens, you will see it does not have an identical menu, or it's in a completely different part of town. It's not going to be on top of each other. So for example, Toco Hill, I call it Toco Thrills, right? Toco Hill, whatever, that has all like the bulk of kosher restaurants, there's a diversity of restaurants. And when, again, I don't know how well you all know the scene over there, but like when Spicy Peach opened, right, which is like another place, kosher gourmet, they had to make sure to differentiate. This one is more dairy, this one's more meat, this one will sell a little bit of this, prepared foods, but not crossover too much, etc. So like Spicy Peach will sell like a hot dog pack in the thing, but they're not going to cut meat because not to infringe on the business. Now, one could take the argument of let the best think capitalism, but Jewish, and maybe we'll have, oh, wow. We are at the time. We're almost at the time. Okay, we have to blitz through this. So although there is a lot to say about the topic of capitalism, maybe we'll save that for the discussion on the economy. Our fifth lesson is on the economy. But for right now, understand that there's three positions. And depending on which position you take, either you advocate for a more free and open market and for people moving in and to open up competing businesses, and you believe that people could come in and potentially take the existing jobs that are in the city. Are you with this? Sound familiar? That people can come in, open up competing businesses, take jobs from those that have the jobs because they're better, they're faster, they're cheaper, whatever it is, versus the third position that says, no, we can block you from coming in if we know your plan to open up a business. We will block you from coming in, and that is okay to block you because we're protecting the economy and we're protecting jobs. If they're already living here and then you can't stop, then you're not blocking immigration. If they already live here, they literally already live here, and then they can open up whatever business they want. The question is, if you know that they're moving here to open up a community business, i.e. to take the job from the local butcher, you can, according to the third position, not the first two, you can block it. Let's see how this played out. We got to do this very quickly. Let's see how this plays out in Pinchov, Poland. This happens in the year 1673. These stories played out, and I will show you how rabbis in real time, in history, in our own history, as a people, and in real Jewish communities, how they dealt with this. Here we go. There was a question that came to the Council of the Four Lands. That was the local large rabbinic council at the time. By the way, any council that's called the Council of the Four Lands is epic. I mean, the Council of Four Lands. That's like sounds like the rabbis are riding in on like steeds with like armor. Do you not picture that? I picture that. At least let me have that picture if you don't have it. The officers and rulers from the city of Pinchov approached us regarding a concern of their community. The poverty in Pinchov has been steadily worsening due to the immigration of people from other communities who have no historical claim to live in Pinchov. The result is that families that have been living in Pinchov for many generations cannot properly support themselves due to the great burden. They determinedly seek employment opportunities but find none. Those who do earn something earn so little that the funds are spent quickly as though there were a hole in their purse. The officers of Pinchot presented this issue to the council of the region, who referred them to us, the Council of Four Lands. Considering what we have heard from the officers about the great and unbearable burden that is upon them, we hereby vest the officers of the Jewish community of Pinchot with the powers of our office, that they may enact regulations as they see fit for the needs of the hour and local conditions, and no one may infringe upon or protest their motions. With regard to those who used to live in Pinchot but have since moved to another region or community and now wish to return, interesting. Here's a plot twist. Not people that from the outside moving in, people who were on the inside, who moved out, who now want to move back in. Even their re-entry can be regulated by the leaders of the community according to what they deem to be most appropriate. And this is in concert with Rabbi Yosef Cologne, who wrote, he was an Italian rabbi, French and Italian rabbi, and who wrote this in the 1400s, text 17. Listen to this. We can, and he takes the third opinion, that you can block people from moving and to open up a community business. We can disallow people from other towns to come and live in our town if they will diminish our earnings that are necessary for our livelihoods. In this case, however, he's talking about a specific case, when Shimon will not earn but only spend his funds in the city, then in my opinion, we cannot refuse him the right to live in the city. If he's not going to take away a job, he's only going to add to the economy, then we cannot block. But if there's a concern that the jobs will be taken, then it's a different issue, and then we can actually block people from coming in. So is there a source in Jewish law for financial concern being a reason to block immigration? Depends who you ask, but there might be. There may be financial grounds, economic grounds, as it were, to block immigration, which means that although up until now, the sources that we have from the Torah are talking about case of existential threat where you feel as a nation that your borders are in danger, and if your borders are in danger, then your nation is in danger of physical collapse, as it were, or a national collapse. Well, what about financial harm? What about financial hardship? That, according to some, may also fall into the same category. Now, let's continue with text 18. Rabbi Yosef Cohen continues, and we're going to go for another few minutes and then wrap this up. It certainly made sense 30 years ago to have looser immigration policies. Then, unlike today, there was no envy toward our prophets, neither was there any protest against it. It is therefore obvious to any fair mind that today the residents of the city can deny outsiders from living in the city if this is against their will. Although the new immigrants seek to improve their condition, have no intention to harm anyone, it is quite clear that this does not negate the fact that they are considered pursuers. That is a very, very sharp line. In Hebrew, we call that rodef, typically used about life and death. The pursuer of life is a rodef, and you eliminate the rodef. In this case, we're not eliminating, but we can block. In other words, if the community is in a financially depressed situation, whether there's not enough money to go around, or whether the government will say, too many Jews, too many whatever, we don't like that. In a case where there is even economic, not physical, but even economic concern and threat, they are considered pursuers to the livelihood, to the literal livelihood of the local populace, and the local populace can block immigration from happening. A similar situation happened in Opata, I don't know how that's pronounced, but in Yiddish, they would say Apta, Poland. And the issue was that the people felt that there were too many Jews, and that would raise the ire of locals and noblemen. Here we go. Text 19. Text 19. The officers and rulers from the city of Apta approached us, the Council of Four Lands, again, that same council. This is in the 1600s, late 1600s, about their newfound bitter reality. The many outsiders coming to live in the place placed a heavy burden on them, and their presence had triggered vociferous complaints and acts of hostility from the locals and from the noblemen. We hereby nod in agreement to their request to live in complete peace. With the powers vested in us, we hereby decree that no outsider shall reside or stay in Apta without the consent of the city's leaders. The leaders have permission to deport anyone who comes without permission. Deportation, Jew on Jew deportation, because the sense was, if there are too many Jews, as you mentioned with Rome, that was obviously 1680, 1490, a few hundred years before. Here we have a situation where the noblemen, the situation, the government, the temperature is too many Jews, too small of an area. It's not going to be good for us. Therefore, we can, us meaning those that currently live there, we can block or even deport those that are adding to the populace and potentially harming everyone there by being too many people in one place. Along those lines, text 20. Do I want to read text 20? I don't know. What we see over here is like this, that whether it's financial concern or whether there's other risk involved, I don't know how you define a risk of the noblemen think that there are too many Jews in one area. I don't know. Is that an existential risk threat? Is that financial threat? I don't know exactly how you position that threat, but when you have a threat or a perceived threat, there is the right of the community to refuse entry and even in some cases to deport. We have Rabbi Yosef Cologne once again in text 21a, who again continues. He is clearly of the opinion of, close borders and disallow entry and even deportation in some situations. Text 21a is another ruling along those lines. And he says the following: when the Talmud rules that we cannot reject an outsider who is willing to pay taxes, which is the text that we read about the fellow opening of the community business, it means that the rabbinic court cannot stop such persons from coming to live in the city because there would be no ethical backing for such a ban. But the residents of the city themselves have the right to close their doors. Should the citizens be lowered to the ground while the newcomers are raised high in the sky? If the outsiders have the right to plead with the local ruler to be allowed entry against the interests of the community, then definitely the community has an uncontestable right to try and influence the ruler that the migrants should not be allowed entry. And so he clearly says, Rabbi Yosef Cologne, I know we're kind of cherry picking his position, just to show you how historically some rabbis, not all, but some have ruled in favor of tighter borders and things being more locked down. And here we have one rabbi, Rabbi Cologne, who lived in France and in Italy, saying that there should be tighter immigration laws. However, Rabbi Yosef Karo, this is text 21b, the next text. For contrast, I told you Ashkenaz Sephardi, I'm going to explain that in a moment. So here we have Rabbi Yosef Karo, who is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, who very fiercely disagrees. And he writes, I am surprised by Rabbi Yosef Cologne's statement. How can one be allowed to turn to the local ruler in a matter not backed by the Jewish courts? Because we just read in 21a that he says that, look, the Jewish law may not say you can block it, but Jewish law never says you can't go to the king and have him block it. That's what 21a, that was the loophole 21a. So Rabbi Yosef Karo says in 21b, what are you saying? The Jewish law wouldn't support banning immigration, but you can just do whatever you want. If they can go to the king, you can go to the king. What does that mean? How can one be allowed to turn to the local ruler or king, whatever government, in a matter not backed by the Jewish courts? If Jewish law doesn't say block, how can you go ahead and try to get them blocked? So here we have Rabbi Yosef Karo says no. And some people say, well, Rabbi Yosef Karo was a Sephardic rabbi, and Rabbi Yosef Cologne was an Ashkenazic rabbi, and Ashkenazic communities faced more threats of these types of pogroms and these types of things and anti-Semitism, etc., than did Sephardic communities. And so from the position of the Sephardic rabbi, he said, be more open, because he didn't know what those threats looked like from the inside. The Ashkenazi rabbi from Eastern Europe, he felt the threat more, so he said, no, we got to close it, or you can close immigration a little bit more. And so you have here these two opinions. In other words, the Ashkenaz Sfard debate is not just about rice or no rice. It's also about immigration, tighter immigration, or a little loose to loosen the restraints on immigration. In summation, because we're going to sum it up, we're at the time and a little bit beyond. Which one? Which one? Refugees. Perfect. Then we're not going to skip this. Perfect. Let's have a refugees, because all until now we're talking about people that want money, or they're moving for a job, or they want to open up, whatever it is, a butcher or a tailor or whatever. But what about a refugee? This is very important. Refugees from danger. There might be different status. In fact, Jewish law says there is. Take a look at what the Mordechai says. The Mordechai, one of the great medieval commentaries, says the following: if refugees flee to a Jewish settlement due to fear and danger, the residents of the community may not stop them from entering and lending money for profit as necessary for their livelihood. Lending money for profit as necessary for their livelihood. Who's lending money to who? Not the residents to the Jewish refugees, but the refugees themselves, setting up money lending operations, outfits, because that's what they could do in many cases, many situations. And caring for their family. They must be allowed to stay until the danger abates. They should contribute to the host community's tax obligations in proportion to the amount of capital they invest. So here we see that refugees cannot be turned away. And text 23, here we have a ruling from the Ledger of the Council of Lithuania from 1656, the refugees of Lithuania. Again, the refugees of Lithuania who fled because of the wars have the right to settle in any community they desire until the crisis passes. No community should reject them. They have permission to engage in business to support their needs, but should participate in paying communal taxes in reciprocation. The same applies to those who were expelled from other countries who have found refuge in our country. They may remain if it is impossible for them to return to their hometowns. Here we see clearly a ruling in Jewish law that when it comes to refugees, people that are fleeing from danger or that were expelled from one country, right? They can no longer go back. So it becomes now obligatory for them to be absorbed as or taken in by other countries and not refused entry or not refused or not kicked out of the country. So it's interesting because, you know, we had those two case studies, 1492, what happened in Portugal and in Rome. And that raises certainly a host of questions because those were individuals that were clearly expelled, kicked out, would probably have the status of refugees. Refugees certainly have a different status. And I think what we can say in conclusion is like this. You know, I mentioned, I hope it came across clear when we looked at those two case studies from Portugal and Rome, that in one case in Portugal, they felt it was an existential threat. Right, there was the issue with the king or whatever it was. Like they might all get expelled. Which, by the way, 5 years later, they did get expelled in 1497, 1492. Spanish Jews was expelled in 1497. Portuguese Jews were expelled. So it was only 5 years later that the Jews in Portugal had a time to stay there. My point is that they had existential fears, whereas in Rome, it was more about financial. Now you could say, well, maybe financial rises the same level of threat. I don't know if it does. I think that's part of the question. The question is when it comes to refugees. So when it comes to refugees, if the question is about money, you got to let them in. We just read that. The last two texts we read, when it comes to money. But what if letting in a refugee is going to get you all killed? God forbid, right? The king is going to come down or kick everybody out or kill everybody. Then what? You have to put your own life at risk to absorb the refugee, or so. Do you put your money at risk for the refugee? The answer is yes. Do you put your life at risk for the refugee? I don't know. It's not clear from the sources. We don't actually have a source for that. There's like a little bit of a window within the kind of the canopies. We put up like different canopies of Jewish law and Jewish history and conversation. But there is one area that's a little bit empty, a little absent, and that is if there's a refugee situation, which means that there's a danger to them, but it'll be a danger, an actual physical danger to you. Well, what do you do then? I don't know, and it's not clear. So the Jews of Portugal probably had more solid grounds, perhaps, to refuse entry. The Jews of Rome, again, it's debatable, but they might not have had such strong grounds to refuse them entry. What's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is, I have now 6 takeaways. Number 1, nations need secure borders. People must respect borders. Immigration may be blocked according to Jewish law when there are valid financial concerns, according to some opinions. Immigration may also be blocked when there are large-scale security concerns. We are to welcome refugees fleeing from danger despite the financial hardships, but when refugees pose potential danger, i.e. life or death danger, it is unclear whether or not they ought to be let in and allowed to stay. What?
The summary you just did.
Oh, no, but I can write it up and send it.
In other words,
Yeah. I sent last week. I sent the summary of the first lesson. And by the way, if anyone is not getting emails, let me know. We'll make sure you get the emails. But yeah, I'll make sure to include that in the written summary, and it'll be in the recording. And you can even play it in faster speed, so it'll go that much faster the second time around. It's so funny because a friend of mine met someone, a rabbi who does a lot of classes, teaches a lot of classes, and they were speaking. He's like, "You sound familiar, but you sound very different." He's like, "Let me guess, you listen to me on double speed." He's like, "Yes, that's it now. Yes, now I recognize." Anyway, the moral of the story is there's Jewish value in welcoming those certainly when it comes to refugees. There's also Jewish value in making sure that communities are solid and stable. And when those two values collide, obviously there's a lot of nuance and a lot of thought that has to be taken into careful consideration. None of these are emotional decisions. These are all decisions that have to be thought about very carefully, using solid principles and of course, the overarching values of compassion and of course, safety and security. So may we make good decisions. When I say we, may we make good decisions. May our country make good decisions. And may we try to balance these very important values that our tradition tells us must be balanced. Thank you for joining me this evening. Next week, the party rolls on. Oh, next week, we are not having class. We are taking a break for Labor Day. In honor of Labor Day, we are off from the class. It's even on the schedule, right? That it's off for next week. Yeah, it's on the schedule. It's on the schedule that we're off the schedule. But the following session, session number 3, is about healthcare. Is universal healthcare a Jewish value, right? Who should pay for it? What type of coverage,
1 minute.
right? How does all this work? Next session, healthcare from a Jewish perspective. And I know what you're thinking. Does Torah speak about universal healthcare? Trust me, I got this. Next time, same bad time, same bad channel, 2 weeks from tonight. See you then. Pleasure, pleasure. Made sense, guys? Yes?
Very good.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Hold on one
add,
second. I'm gonna get, we're just schmooze over here and then we're gonna get to online. Yeah.
You should see what's going on in Italy right now.
Italy,
Right now, they
With
just
what?
passed a law
about immigration?
about publishing all the Jewish businesses. Today,
Why?
because they want to become a communist country.
Ah,
Today,
interesting. Okay, a lot to speak about. Pleasure. By the way, moving forward, I think we'll be here. I believe so. We have to navigate how that all worked out. I don't know. I'll have to check with them. But if so, this will be easy access from the park.
I don't know if you, hey,
Pleasure. Good.
I don't know if you saw this, but a few years ago, like during the head, there was this series on PBS called G.I. Joe.
No, although I get the reference.
Yeah, it
G.I.
was,
Joe.
but it took place from American Jews during World War II,
Oh.
going over, and the reason I raised that is it's something you might be interested in watching, because it's a multi-part series, and they talk to Mel Brooks and Rob Reiner, a bunch of people who were serving, but the idea of people from around the country who had never met a Jew, because they were now all serving in the army together, what the diversity and the experience of people, it was, in those days, it was with Catholic, Christian, and Jewish. It was Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and they would talk, we would have joint service, just when you were talking about
Break it
diversity
down.
of the different,
Right.
you got different people from different cultures, but the experience of what each took away from it. It's actually a fascinating, really, really good series.
fascinating. I've heard about Mel Brooks and how when he was over there, he would entertain and
He was in it, and so was Rob. They were actually I think it was Rob Reiner said there was one guy who found out he was a Jew, like it was like he wouldn't even sleep in the same area or something. But it was just, the idea was it broke down barriers.
exposure broke down.
That was one of the things when you were talking before is, well, you've got the different cultures and different nations, exposing them to each other, dispels a lot of prejudices when you get to meet them, which we experience. Anyway, but good seeing you.
Great to see.
Did want to, here, I just want to show you one last thing, talk to the people online. So that would be, these were the Hasidic rabbis in my family.
They look legit. Who are they?
Well, he was the chief Orthodox rabbi of the US in the 1920s. That's Rabbi Yudalevich. And that's Rabbi Golubovsky, and I think that's Schlossberg.
And these are your relatives?
Rabbi Golubovsky was my great grandfather, and
No
that's
way.
his brother.
That's amazing.
They just all have different last names.
Well,
They came
that's-
from Russia.
Right.
But yeah, there were 9 generations of Hasidim rabbis until my grandfather became a rabbi.
Which is
Kind of
another
the
form
same thing.
right, yeah. I
Well, I
was
mean,
gonna
that was,
say.
I'm reading it going, okay, I'm a lawyer. I can understand the difference.
What type of law do you practice?
Criminal defense.
Oh,
So what's your next?
I love, well, I love true crime podcasts. What can I say?
But if you get a chance, watch.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
don't think I'm on the list, and I probably haven't paid anything, so I need to pay.
I'll get you in. We'll get you in on this.
If you get a chance, watch G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe.
I promise you it's worth it.
Got it. Great. This was fun. Yeah, for sure. For some reason, when I send it, maybe it's my Gmail, it just says message blocked. It may not be you, maybe me. So, yeah, oh, I don't know why. Rabbi Ali, R-A-B-I-A-R-I, at the Torah Center, ATL.
Rabbi, see you on Thursday.
Yes, looking forward. So Rabbi Ari at the Torah Center, ATL.org. Okay, awesome. If not, I'll text you. It's also good. All right.
Take care.
Do my best, everybody.
I shall.
Ari,
Hey,
I just
Mom.
wanted to add something. It has nothing to do with the United States right now, thank God. But there are countries in Europe that are now saying that they are restricting immigration from certain countries because of religious and cultural. Well, the religion became mixed up with the cultural
It's interesting because
problem.
not one of the criteria that we have seen in Jewish law. The criteria is either, I guess, physical threat or financial harm. Unless you want to say that the religious or the religion
It is a physical threat. They want to institute Sharia law in all the countries in Europe that they are going to be a majority in. For example, in England and in Germany and in Czechoslovakia and in Hungary, there are elements that are trying to pass laws against immigration from these countries, or people of these religions. So, and it's based on the Edomite objection. You harmed your country where you were living in. It oppressed people over there. You're going to do the same thing over here, and you're stating that.
Yes, the counter argument is that if they're refugees from those countries, they're trying to get away from that oppression. Then there might
these are people.
No, I'm not saying whether it is or not. I'm just saying that.
But I'm just saying that it's interesting that it's actually coming up in these countries, and that's that was the original when the in 2000, I guess, or whatever the last whatever the last election was, when there was a law against an attempt to put a law against Muslim immigration. Then people say religious discrimination. Well, look what's happening in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are nuanced questions, and it just depends on.
And look what's happened. I mean, maybe it was right. We thought, oh no, that's religious discrimination. However,
yeah, definitely good, interesting questions to.
It's very interesting. Very
Deborah,
interesting.
Hello. Great
Hope
class.
you
I mean,
enjoyed-
I am so enjoying this. You have no idea.
Oh, good.
Well, I enjoy all your classes, but
Well,
this
thank
one's
you.
different. This one's
There's so
different.
many. Yeah, that's very different, and there's a lot. And I think one of the cool things about this is that we're not necessarily aiming to give a definitive answer. It's more of like, here are the considerations. Here are some parameters. Here's a Jewish framework. That doesn't translate into like, okay, and here's what U.S. policy needs to be. That's not at all the conclusion. It's more of like, these are some things to consider. These are some values that our people have come up with over the last 3,000 years. And here's some things that we can think about when addressing the issues. And I think it is unique.
So much of our policies and our beliefs in this country come from Judeo law and teachings. They say we're Judeo-Christian here, but a lot of it has come from, and so I'm finding this really fascinating because it's kind of bringing me back to the beginning, the roots of where these opinions and it's very interesting.
Yeah, and then I mean there was an issue that was actually, I think it was Leo Frank who said you can't let the Jews in from Eastern Europe because not only are they gonna harm us here in America, us Jews financially, but they're gonna make the non-Jews turn against us. And he actually.
Well, yeah, and I
that's
think
all.
that's been as we saw tonight, it's been a historical argument that has, in 1492, that was the same, I mean, or a similar argument. And, you read it today, and I mean, I can say for myself, it feels uncomfortable. Like, what? So some Jews are going to move in and like everything, but I didn't live at that time. It's hard to put yourself in a situation where, if you're not in there. And it's interesting when you look at the different parameters of Jewish law and how that plays out. How
It wasn't Leo Frank. It was, I forget what his name was. It had a Frank. It was a prominent guy, and I think he was a Supreme Court judge or something, and he actually succeeded in stopping Jews from Eastern Europe to come here.
Maybe with the quotas.
Yeah, and it was people like, he has a bad name now, and Americans, like Jewish Americans don't, what did he do to, but he had a Jewish precedent for it.
Yeah. All right. Good conversation. Good to see you. All right. Lila, good night.
Thank you, Ari.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.